My name is Marissa Caldwell. I'm 32, a freelance designer living in Boston. I'm the sister who always shows up, who covers the emergencies, who fixes what breaks. And maybe, just maybe, I've gotten used to being invisible. Before I tell you what happened, let me pause. If you've ever been overlooked or pushed aside by the very people you sacrificed for, then please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. Because today's story is about the day my family made it crystal clear I wasn't welcome. The Saturday air carried that sharp New England chill, the kind that seeps through your gloves no matter how tight you pull them. I balanced a craft tube of sample invitations under my arm and a white bakery box with mock-ups pressed to my chest. The drive from my South End apartment to Concord had been quick. 35 minutes on I-95, radio low, coffee cooling too fast in the cup holder. I rehearsed what I'd say when I handed them the designs. Savannah will be thrilled with the copper foil. Ethan will finally thank me, maybe even pay me back. I clung to those scraps of hope. The Caldwell house rose like something from a postcard. Colonial white siding, hunter blue shutters, 2 evergreens clipped into perfect cones. I rang the bell. No answer. I hesitated, then heard voices drifting from the kitchen. The door was unlocked. Inside, warmth and the faint tang of lemon cleaner wrapped around me. I moved down the hallway, then froze at the sound of Savannah's voice, smooth and deliberate, carrying easily over the marble counters. "Mom, listen, I don't want Marissa at the engagement party," she said, her tone casual but sharp. "She's too serious, always hovering. She'll just bring down the vibe. This is supposed to be fun, not heavy." My knuckles whitened around the box. I felt heat rising in my face as she added, "Yes, I know she designed the invitations. They're fine, but I don't want her energy there. Ethan agrees it's easier without her." The words sliced clean. I'd thought the worst insult was being forgotten. No, it was being deliberately erased. I stood stiff as a statue in the entryway until Savannah appeared, phone still tucked against her ear. Her eyes widened briefly, then she plastered on a smile, slipping the device onto the counter. "Oh, Marissa," she chirped, feigning surprise. "You're early. Did you bring the samples?" I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay level. "I did. I also heard what you said." Her expression didn't flinch. She adjusted her silk blouse, lifted her chin. "Look, it's nothing personal. I just want the evening to feel light. You understand, right? Different people, different energies." I set the bakery box on the console table by the door, sliding out 3 variations. Paper A with deep emboss, paper B with thick foil, and a plain stock to show texture. Savannah gave them a cursory glance. "This one works," she said quickly. "I'll let you know." That was it. No offer of tea, no thank you for staying up past midnight kerning every letter. Just dismissal disguised as courtesy. My phone buzzed. Ethan's name lit the screen. His text read, "Thanks for dropping the samples. Party's small. Please don't make this a thing. Love you." A thumbs up emoji followed, like a period. "Don't make this a thing." The phrase tasted metallic, the same words my father had used every time he brushed me aside. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading up my throat. I snapped the lid back on the box and reached for the door. Savannah's voice floated after me, light and sugary. "Thanks again, Marissa. You're so talented." She said talented the way someone says useful, not valued. Outside, the wind slapped my cheeks raw. I sat in my car, the samples beside me, hands trembling against the steering wheel. Through the windshield, the Caldwell house gleamed immaculate, every window symmetrical, every hedge trimmed, perfect on the outside, cold within. I unlocked my phone again, staring at the balance in my account. The $2,000 I'd loaned Ethan months ago, money meant for a branding course in New York, was gone. Deadline passed, seat lost, sacrifice swallowed. I typed 4 words into my notes app. "No more free work." Then another line. "If I'm not on their list, I'll make my own." The knot in my chest pulled tighter, but beneath it a spark flickered, small, defiant. I turned the ignition, letting the car's low hum drown out the echo of Savannah's words. This was the moment I didn't know yet was a beginning. The drive back to Boston felt longer than usual, though the dashboard clock insisted it was just under 40 minutes. By the time I carried myself up the narrow stairwell to my South End apartment, the weight of the morning clung to me like damp clothes. I tossed my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and slid my laptop open on the kitchen counter. My checking account stared back. Balances, pending charges, the steady drain of rent and insurance. My eyes locked on one line I'd highlighted in hopeful yellow months ago. NYC Branding Intensive, deposit due. Next to it, the word expired blinked like a cruel reminder. That was the course I'd been saving for since grad school, the one that could have sharpened my skills and opened doors to bigger clients. I had given that money to Ethan instead. The memory came uninvited. Ethan calling close to midnight from his base, voice tight with panic. "Sis, my card's been frozen. I can't access anything, and I need $2,000 to cover until payroll. Just until next week, I swear." I hadn't hesitated. I wired the funds within minutes, telling myself that's what family did, that's what I always did. Weeks turned into months. No repayment, no mention, just silence padded with excuses. I picked up my phone, scrolling through our last thread of messages. All I found were one-line updates. "Busy, talk later. Don't stress. You know I'll pay you back." Words as hollow as Savannah's thank you. I hit dial anyway. The line rang 4 times before my father's voice answered. "Dad, it's me," I said, steadying my tone. "Did you know Ethan never paid back the $2,000 I lent him? That was my tuition deposit for a course I've wanted for years." A pause. Papers rustled in the background, like he was doing anything but listening. "Marissa, don't make this a bigger deal than it is. He's under a lot of pressure. Be patient." My hand tightened around the phone. Be patient? That money was my chance to grow. Do you realize what I gave up? "Sweetheart," he sighed. The word dipped in irritation more than affection. "Your brother's future impacts this family. Yours, it's different. Don't sour things. Just respect his decisions." Different. That single word stung worse than the rest. I wanted to shout that my dreams were no less important, that my sacrifices deserved more than dismissal. Instead, my throat closed around the words, leaving me with silence. "Dad," I whispered, "what about respecting me?" But he'd already hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, phone pressed to my palm, the city's winter light spilling gray across my counters. The invitations, the lost deposit, the constant minimizing. It all piled into one undeniable truth. Every sacrifice I made was invisible unless it benefited Ethan. For the first time, anger burned hotter than hurt, and I knew this story, my story, wasn't going to fade quietly into the background anymore. I stood in the quiet of my kitchen long after the call with Dad ended, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. The silence pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. Out of habit, I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over Ethan's name. I almost called him, almost slipped back into the role of fixer. But instead, I pressed the one number that never failed me, Grandma Eleanor. She answered on the second ring, her Rhode Island accent warm and sharp at once. "Marissa, sweetheart, I was just about to make tea. You sound like someone who needs a cup." I didn't even try to mask my voice. "They left me out, Grandma. Savannah said I'd ruin the vibe. And Dad, he told me Ethan's future mattered more than mine." There was a pause, the clink of a spoon against china. Then, calmly, she said, "I wish I could tell you I'm surprised. But they've been doing this for years, haven't they? Thanksgiving, Ethan's homecoming, even last summer's barbecue. Didn't you notice the way plans shifted last minute? The memories lined up like dominoes, the vague invitations, the startled looks when I showed up. My stomach tightened. You mean they never wanted me there?" "Not never," she corrected gently. "They wanted you when you were useful. That's a hard truth, but it's better than lies that bleed you dry." Her words stung, but in a cleansing way, like antiseptic on an open wound. I pressed the heel of my hand to my forehead. "I gave him my course money, Grandma. $2,000 I saved for years. It's gone, and so is the chance I had. Her voice hardened. Then it's time you stop handing out pieces of yourself like party favors. You deserve investment too. In fact, I heard the faint tapping of keys. I'm wiring you something. Enough for a plane ticket and a room somewhere that isn't dripping with Reed family drama. Grandma, you don't have to. I know I don't, she cut me off. That's the point. This isn't about Ethan. This is about you. Use it to go somewhere new. Breathe different air. See what life feels like when you're not carrying everyone else's weight. I swallowed hard, eyes stinging. You really think I can? I know you can. The question is, will you let yourself? Her challenge lingered long after the call ended. For the first time in years, someone hadn't asked me to sacrifice. Someone had dared me to live. The next morning, Eleanor's words were still echoing in my head as I packed an overnight bag and drove north. Boston fell away behind me, replaced by pine forests and frozen lakes. My phone buzzed a dozen times. Texts from Dad, one-liners from Ethan, even Savannah's polished reminders about keeping peace. But I ignored them all. I wasn't going to the party as a guest. I just wanted to drop off the box of finished designs, look them in the eye, and leave. 2 hours later, I turned onto the long drive that wound around Lake Winnipesaukee. The Reed family's lake house sat perched above the water, glass walls gleaming under the winter sun. Music thumped faintly, and cars lined the gravel shoulder all the way down the hill. It wasn't small at all. This was a full-blown event. I parked at the far end of the lot, clutching the box like a shield. The laughter inside carried through the frosted windows. I stepped out, my boots crunching on ice, and for a moment, I considered turning back. But then, through the massive glass wall, I saw Ethan. He was leaning against the bar, head tilted back in laughter, and beside him stood Kelly Monroe, his high school girlfriend. Her hand rested casually on his forearm, the gesture far too familiar. I froze. Savannah swept across the room in a sequined dress, her smile brittle. She followed Ethan's gaze, saw Kelly's hand, and in one swift motion, snatched a champagne flute off a tray. The glass arced high, liquid catching the lights, before shattering across Ethan's chest. The crowd gasped. Music cut off. "What the hell is this, Ethan?" Savannah's voice rang out sharp as glass. "It's nothing. She just stopped by—" Ethan stammered, wiping his shirt, but his guilty smile betrayed him. Savannah's scream cut through the room. "You're flirting with your ex in front of everyone? In front of me?" She hurled the empty flute to the floor. It exploded in shards. From my vantage in the dark parking lot, my heart pounded. The box of invitations slipped in my grip, and I pressed my forehead against the cold car roof. Inside, Jack stepped forward, face red, voice booming. "Ethan, pull yourself together. Do you know how bad this looks for our family?" Ethan swung back at him, rage and alcohol mixing. "You've been running my life since I was born. Maybe I don't want your perfect little plan." He slammed his fist into the wall, leaving a dark smear on the white plaster. The crowd scattered, whispers rising. Someone shouted for ice. Linda wrung her hands near the buffet table, pretending nothing was happening. And there it was, the collapse I had spent my whole life trying to prevent. Every time I stepped in, I held their chaos together with invisible thread. But now, watching from the outside, I realized that without me, the seams split wide open. My phone buzzed again. Tara this time. "You seeing this?" Absolute meltdown. I didn't reply. I couldn't peel my eyes away. For 32 years, I'd been the quiet fixer, the one who loaned money, who skipped milestones, who swallowed insults to keep the family picture polished. And now, on the other side of the glass, I saw them as they were, broken without me, but not missing me. The anger that had been smoldering since Concord surged. My breath came sharp, visible clouds in the night air. I set the invitation box on the hood of my car, yanked out my phone, and opened the travel app. Aspen, one way, first class. Departure, tomorrow morning. My finger hovered. Behind me, glass shattered again. Another crash of voices. Savannah storming toward the door. Ethan clutching his hand, Dad yelling for order. The scene played like theater, grotesque and mesmerizing. I pressed book now. The confirmation email pinged instantly, its subject line glowing in the cold. Your trip to Aspen is confirmed. For the first time, I didn't feel like the family's safety net. I felt like someone who had finally cut herself loose. I slid back into the driver's seat, the box of invitations abandoned on the hood. As I pulled onto the dark road winding away from the lake, a single thought anchored me. If I wasn't on their guest list, I'd start writing my own. By dawn, I was already at Logan Airport, the lake house chaos still echoing in my head like a bad dream I couldn't shake. My overnight bag sat at my feet, half-packed with sweaters and sketchbooks. I checked the screen one more time. Boston, Aspen, non-stop. First class. A ticket I'd never have allowed myself. Until now. The terminal buzzed with people rushing for early flights, yet I felt strangely calm. Almost weightless. As I walked toward the gate, my phone buzzed over and over. Dad, Ethan, Savannah. I silenced it, shoving the device deep into my coat pocket. When the boarding call came, I stepped into the jet bridge, my breath catching. This wasn't just a flight. This was the first time I was choosing myself, unapologetically. Inside the cabin, leather seats gleamed under soft lights. I slid into mine, the window seat, and buckled in. The flight attendant leaned down with a warm smile. Champagne? Yes, I said quickly, surprising even myself. I'd never ordered champagne before noon, never indulged without calculating if I deserved it. She returned with a glass, bubbles rising like sparks. As the plane taxied, I pulled out my passport and boarding pass, snapping a photo. My hand trembled, but not from fear. I posted it with the caption, "If I'm not on their list, I'll make my own." The engines roared, the plane lifted, and Boston shrank beneath me. Gray rooftops fading into winter clouds. I tilted the glass toward the window, whispering to myself, "Here's to something different." I thought about the thousands of times I'd put others first. The late nights designing invitations I wasn't invited to celebrate, the savings poured into Ethan's emergencies, the swallowed words, the quiet endurance. For once, I wasn't fixing, funding, or fading into the background. I was flying toward air that belonged only to me. The champagne stung my throat in the best way. Warmth spread through me, loosening a knot that had lived in my shoulders for years. Somewhere high above the country, between what I'd endured and what waited ahead, I felt the tiniest shift. I wasn't just escaping, I was declaring, and I intended to make it permanent. When the plane touched down at Aspen-Pitkin County Airport, the mountains rose like stone guardians against a pale sky. Snow glittered along the ridges, and for a second I wondered if I'd landed in another life. Maybe I had. At the lodge, I checked into a suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the peaks in rose-gold light. I set my bag down, staring at the view until the sting in my eyes forced me to blink. It was beautiful. It was mine, and I had no idea what to do with it. The next morning, determined not to waste this chance, I signed up for a beginner ski class. My instructor, a wiry man with laugh lines etched deep from years of sun glare, introduced himself as Kai. "First time?" he asked, adjusting the straps on my boots. "First time doing anything just for me," I admitted, surprising us both. He studied me for a beat, then nodded. "Good place to start." On the bunny slope, my legs wobbled like they'd forgotten how to hold me. I fell within seconds, snow seeping cold through my gloves. Embarrassment burned hotter than the chill, but Kai skied back with an easy grin. "Falling means you're learning. Get up." So I did, again and again. My body ached, but each time I stood, the knot in my chest loosened. By afternoon, I found myself in the lodge cafe, cheeks flushed, nursing hot chocolate at a table full of strangers. A retired teacher from Vermont told stories about her students. A widower from Texas laughed about learning snowboarding at 60. A young woman from Chicago shared how she'd booked this trip to heal after a brutal breakup. No one asked me about Ethan, about Savannah, about why my phone was buzzing nonstop in my pocket. They simply welcomed me, their voices weaving into a warmth I hadn't felt at a family table in years. I realized then I wasn't invisible here. I wasn't a tool or a fixer. I was just Marissa. And that was enough. Later, back in my suite, I pulled out my phone. 17 missed calls, 30 unread texts. My father, my brother, Savannah. I stared at the screen, waiting for the familiar spike of guilt, but instead, I felt a strange calm. I powered the phone off, set it face down, and whispered into the silence, "Not tonight." The mountains loomed outside, ancient and unbothered by human chaos. I climbed into bed, muscles sore but spirit lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't fall asleep waiting for the next emergency call. I fell asleep waiting for tomorrow. The soreness in my legs from skiing lingered for days, but it was a good ache, the kind that reminded me I'd stood up more times than I'd fallen. By the third morning in Aspen, I felt restless. Restless in a way that had nothing to do with the slopes. I wandered into a small cafe tucked between a ski rental shop and a bookstore. The place smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon, the air humming with quiet conversations. Behind the counter, the owner, a woman about my age with messy blonde hair and a sweatshirt that read "Bean There," fumbled with a chalkboard sign. "Need help?" I asked, pointing to the crooked board. She sighed, brushing flour off her sleeve. "I was trying to sketch a new menu design. I'm hopeless with this stuff. Customers keep saying the place looks great, but the signage looks like a middle school project." Something in me stirred. "I do design work," I offered cautiously. Her eyes lit up. "Seriously? You mean like professional?" "Yes. Invitations, branding, layout, you name it. I've been freelancing for years." She pulled the chalkboard closer, showing me a messy scrawl of coffee names. "If you can make this look like it belongs in Aspen instead of a gas station, I'll owe you for life." I laughed, the sound startling even me. "How about we start with a proper logo? Something copper-toned, maybe? It'll tie in with the warm wood in here." She clapped her hands, delighted. "You're hired. What's your name?" "Marissa Caldwell." I hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking of starting fresh here. Maybe under a studio name. Caldwell and Copper." She repeated it slowly, tasting the sound. "Caldwell and Copper. That's got style. I'd put that on a bag of beans." For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a flicker of pride that didn't come tangled in obligation. That evening in my suite, I spread out sketch pads across the bed. I worked until midnight, pencils smudging my fingers, copper gold accents flashing under the lamp. When I finally stepped back, the cafe's new logo stared back at me. Clean lines, bold copper lettering, a design that felt like mine, not borrowed or demanded. I packaged the mock-ups in a sleek PDF and sent them off. Within minutes, a reply. "This is perfect. How much do I owe you?" The word stopped me. "How much do I owe you? Not thanks, sis, I'll pay you back someday. Not can you do this as a favor? Real work. Real value." I typed out my first official invoice under the name Caldwell and Copper Studio. When the payment hit my account the next morning, I stared at the confirmation screen until tears blurred it. It wasn't about the money, it was about finally getting paid for the weight I carried. I posted a short clip of the design process online, just my hands sketching, a quick before and after shot of the cafe's old chalkboard versus the new copper-toned logo. Within hours, strangers were liking, sharing, commenting. "Who made this? Incredible work." I whispered into the quiet of my room. No more free work. Not ever again. For the first time, it felt like more than a note in my phone. It felt like a promise I could keep. The cafe project gave me momentum I hadn't felt in years. With my first paid invoice sitting safely in my account, I signed up for 2 things I never would have dared back in Boston: a series of intermediate ski lessons and a wellness program at the lodge's therapy center. The days began on the slopes. Mornings in Aspen were razor-sharp, the kind of cold that pinched your cheeks until they flushed red. Kai, my instructor, met me at the lift with his trademark squint and a grin. "You ready to stop falling like a beginner?" he teased. I smirked, sliding my goggles into place. "I've perfected falling. Now I want to learn how to stay up." He chuckled and pushed us toward the lift. "Good. Staying up is about leaning in, not fighting gravity." On the first run down a green slope, my thighs burned as I fought the urge to stiffen. Halfway down, I panicked, lost balance, and toppled sideways. Snow puffed around me like smoke. Kai skied to a stop beside me. "There's your problem. You keep bracing against the hill. Trust your edges, bend your knees, fall forward into control." I pulled myself upright, breath ragged. Forward feels like falling. "Forward is progress," he said simply. I tried again. This time I leaned instead of fighting. My skis cut smoothly across the snow, and for a fleeting moment I felt weightless, not falling, not failing, just moving. By afternoon, sore muscles drove me indoors. That's where therapy began. Dr. Winters, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into a bun, welcomed me into her sunlit office at the lodge. A mug of herbal tea waited on the side table. "So," she said, settling into her chair, "you've been carrying other people's burdens for a long time." The words hit harder than any fall on the slopes. "It's what I do. If I don't, everything collapses." She tilted her head. "And what happened when you didn't show up at the party?" I looked down at my hands, remembering Savannah's champagne glass shattering, Ethan's fist slamming the wall, Dad shouting for control. They imploded, without me. "Exactly. You aren't their glue, Marissa. You've been tricked into believing that. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. You decide who gets through." I swallowed hard. What if shutting the door means I lose them? Her eyes softened. "Then maybe you're not losing them. You're losing the version of them who only valued you when you were useful. That's not love. That's dependence." Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. "So what do I do now?" "Practice boundaries the way you practice skiing. At first it feels unnatural. You'll stumble. But with repetition, your muscles and your heart will remember." That evening, I sat in the lodge's great room, firelight dancing across polished stone. My body ached from ski falls, my mind ached from therapy revelations. Yet for the first time in years, the ache didn't feel like punishment. It felt like growth. I powered on my phone long enough to see another flood of missed calls and messages. I didn't open them. Instead, I whispered Dr. Winters' words to myself. "Forward is progress." And this time, I believed them. The rhythm of Aspen settled into me like a second heartbeat. Mornings on the slopes, afternoons in therapy, evenings sketching in the glow of my suite's fireplace. But one snowy Tuesday, everything shifted with a single phone call. I was hunched over my laptop, finishing revisions for the cafe logo, when an unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. Normally, I would have ignored it. This time, I answered. "Hello, is this Caldwell and Copper Studio?" The name still felt fragile on my tongue. "Yes, this is Marissa." "This is Jenna Morales from Summit Roasters. We're opening a flagship cafe in downtown Denver. Someone passed along the Bean There logo you designed, and we'd like to know if you're available to pitch a full branding package." For a moment, I just stared at the frost on the window. Denver. A flagship cafe. Me. "Yes," I said, breath catching. "I'm available." She emailed me immediately with details, a presentation in 2 days, travel covered, and an opening timeline that made my pulse race. This wasn't a chalkboard sign in a corner cafe. This was a project that could put Caldwell and Copper on the map. The next 48 hours blurred into furious preparation. I pulled late nights, sketching, scanning, and refining, the copper tones that had become my signature now glowing across mock-ups of coffee bags, signage, and branded mugs. My desk was littered with pencils and empty mugs of tea, but I felt alive. When the day came, I boarded the short flight to Denver with a portfolio clutched against my chest. The city stretched wide beneath the Rockies, a reminder of how far I'd already traveled, not just in miles, but in courage. The boardroom at Summit Roasters buzzed with energy. Jenna greeted me with a handshake. "We're looking for something fresh, something that feels rooted in Colorado but modern enough to stand out nationally." I laid out my boards, mountain silhouettes folded into steam rising from mugs, copper foil typography echoing both the rugged landscape and the warmth of a cafe. I spoke without notes, the words tumbling out with a conviction I didn't know I had. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then one of the partners leaned forward. "This feels like Colorado. Not generic, not borrowed, authentic." Jenna smiled. "We'd like to move forward." On the flight back to Aspen, contract papers resting in my lap, I couldn't stop replaying those words. Authentic. Move forward. That night, I called Grandma Eleanor. "I signed my first big client," I said, my voice trembling with joy. She laughed, rich and knowing. "See what happens when you stop carrying their chaos? You finally had room to carry your own dreams." I looked at the signed contract one more time. For years, my work had been invisible, handed out for free, taken for granted. Now, it was mine, paid for, respected. As snow fell thick outside my window, I whispered into the quiet, "This is just the beginning." And I meant it. The morning after the Summit Roasters deal, I was still riding the high. My contract folder sat open on the desk, copper letterhead glowing under the lamp. For once, the future felt wide and unclaimed. That's when my phone lit up with a FaceTime request from an unfamiliar number. Curiosity won. I answered, and Savannah's face filled the screen. Her mascara was smudged, her hair a careless knot. Not the polished, perfect woman I was used to. "Marissa," she breathed, eyes darting. "Please don't hang up. I need to say this." I stayed silent, watching her fidget. She swallowed hard. "I was the one who pushed Ethan to cut you out of the party. I told him you'd bring down the vibe. My words, not his." The admission hit like ice water. "So it wasn't some misunderstanding. You wanted me gone." Her voice cracked. "Yes, because you intimidate me. You're competent, smart. Everyone sees it, even when they pretend not to. And I hated how Ethan looked at you, like you were the one person he could always rely on. I wanted to be that for him." My chest tightened. For years, I'd assumed I was disposable. Now here was the truth. I'd been deliberately erased. "So you lied. You made me the problem." She nodded quickly, tears streaking. "I thought if I removed you, I'd finally measure up, but it backfired. Ethan's been spiraling since the lake house. He won't talk to me, won't even plan the wedding. And I keep hearing Grandma's voice in my head. You cut out the only responsible adult in your life. She was right. It was me. I did it." I gripped the edge of the desk, grounding myself. Her confession was messy, desperate, and strangely liberating. "Savannah," I said slowly, "you didn't ruin me by excluding me. You freed me. Because if you hadn't pushed me out, I'd still be there, fixing everything, losing myself." Her mouth trembled. "So, can you forgive me?" I let the silence stretch. "I don't know yet. Forgiveness isn't automatic. It's earned. But thank you for finally telling the truth." Her eyes flooded with relief, even as shame lingered. "That's more than I deserve." The call ended. I stared at my reflection in the darkened screen. For the first time, Savannah's jealousy didn't shrink me. It proved my worth. 2 days after Savannah's late-night confession, I returned to my suite to find a cream-colored envelope slipped under the door. The paper was heavy, the handwriting familiar. Ethan's. My pulse quickened before I even opened it. Inside, embossed lettering announced, "You are warmly invited to celebrate the marriage of Ethan Reed and Savannah James. Intimate ceremony, 30 guests only. Your presence matters." For a long moment, I just stared at the words. My name, Marissa Caldwell, was written on the envelope in Ethan's uneven script, not Savannah's immaculate cursive, not some secretary's type. His hand, his effort. I sank onto the edge of the bed, invitation trembling in my fingers. After everything, the exclusion, the lies, the chaos, they were asking me back. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom this time. "Please come, sweetheart. It's different now. We want you there." A second message followed from Dad, uncharacteristically brief. I know I was wrong. Let's start over. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, unease curled low in my stomach. The words were right, but were they real? Grandma Eleanor called not 10 minutes later, her voice sharp but warm. Got your invite yet? Yes, I whispered. Good. About time they pulled their heads out of the sand. But remember, this doesn't erase what they did. An invitation isn't an apology, it's just an opening. What you do with it, that's your power. I traced the raised copper ink with my thumb, remembering the champagne glass exploding at the lake house, the sound of Ethan's fist hitting the wall, Savannah's desperate confession. I didn't trust them. Not yet, but I trusted myself. I propped the invitation on the dresser, staring at it under the lamplight. It didn't look like a demand, not anymore. It looked like a choice. And for the first time in my life, I realized the difference. The envelope sat on my dresser for a week, copper ink gleaming each time the lamplight hit. In the end, I RSVP'd yes, not because I wanted to mend their wounds, but because I needed to draw my own line in public, where excuses couldn't erase it. 2 weeks later, I drove into Concord for the rescheduled engagement party. This time, it wasn't a sprawling spectacle on the lake, but a trimmed-down affair at a historic inn downtown. Snow dusted the brick sidewalks, warm light spilled from the windows, laughter carrying out into the cold. I paused at the door, inhaling the sharp winter air. My pulse raced, but beneath the nerves was something steadier. Resolve. Inside, the inn's ballroom glowed with strings of lights and polished wood floors. A jazz trio played near the fireplace. Guests clustered in groups of 10 or 12, glasses in hand, murmuring in hushed tones. I felt eyes turn as I entered, recognition, surprise, even curiosity. Savannah was the first to spot me. Her smile faltered, then steadied. She crossed the room in her emerald dress, nerves flickering in her eyes. Marissa, you came. I did, I said evenly. Don't worry, I'm not here to ruin your vibe. Color rushed to her cheeks. Before she could reply, Ethan appeared, tie loosened, glass already half empty. Sis, he muttered, voice thick. Glad you made it. Means a lot. I studied him. He looked smaller than the brother I used to hold together. We'll see if you still mean that in 10 minutes. That was when Dad materialized, shoulders squared like he owned the room. Marissa, he said in that commanding tone that used to shut me down. Good to see you back with family. Now let's keep this civil. Civil, I repeated, my voice carrying farther than I expected. Conversations nearby dimmed. That's a funny word, Dad, considering what brought us here. Mom hovered behind him, hands twisting her clutch. Sweetheart, please, tonight is about love. No, I cut in, and the word snapped through the room like a spark. Tonight is about truth. I pulled a manila envelope from my bag and laid it on the nearest table. You've all treated my time, my money, my life as disposable, so I thought I'd itemize it, since numbers seem to speak louder than feelings in this family. The room hushed. I opened the envelope and spread out a neatly printed invoice, copper-foiled at the top, Caldwell and Copper Studio, outstanding balance. Gasps rippled. Ethan blinked at the page. What the hell is this? I read aloud, my voice steady. Loan, $2,000, emergency transfer during deployment, unpaid, hours, 150 design work, engagement announcements, invitations, revisions, billed at professional rate, unpaid, additional services, emotional support during crisis calls, moving assistance, care packages, valued at market rate, unpaid. Laughter flickered at the edges of the crowd, not mocking but incredulous. This isn't a joke, I said firmly. I've been your unpaid employee, your bank, your crisis manager, and when I wasn't convenient, you cut me out. Not quietly, publicly. Well, now I'm answering in kind. Dad's face darkened. Marissa, this is inappropriate. Inappropriate? I snapped. What's inappropriate is raising a daughter to believe her worth is measured only by what she gives. What's inappropriate is excluding me from a 120-person party while telling me not to make it a thing. What's inappropriate is watching your children implode and blaming the one person who finally walked away. The jazz trio had gone silent. Every eye was on us. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't falter. "I'm not asking for repayment," I continued. "I'm demanding respect, and if you can't give it, then consider this the last event I'll ever attend." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Grandma Eleanor, seated near the fireplace, leaned forward. Her voice carried like thunder despite her years. "She's right about all of it. I've watched this family bleed her dry, and I won't watch it happen again." Murmurs swept the room. Ethan stared at the invoice, shame flickering in his eyes. "I didn't realize." "You didn't want to realize," I corrected. "You liked having me as your safety net. But I've cut the strings." Savannah stepped closer, voice shaking. "She's telling the truth. I'm the one who wanted her gone, and I was wrong." Gasps rose again, this time sharper. I looked at her, surprised by the honesty, then turned back to the room. "I didn't come here to sabotage a wedding. I came to tell you that my role in this family has changed, permanently." I gathered the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it into my bag. Boundaries aren't negotiable. Not anymore. Silence stretched, heavy and electric. Then, slowly, Grandma Eleanor rose to her feet and began to clap. The sound echoed in the hall, deliberate and strong. A few others joined, hesitant, then steady. I felt heat rush to my cheeks, but I didn't back down. Dad's jaw worked, torn between fury and something like realization. Mom's eyes brimmed with tears. Ethan lowered his gaze. Savannah's hands twisted together, her confession still hanging in the air. And me. I stood tall for the first time in my life, not as their fixer or scapegoat, but as myself. The sound of Grandma Eleanor's clapping still echoed when the silence shattered into voices, sharp, defensive, pleading. Dad was the first to speak, his face red as brick. "Enough of this theater, Marissa. You embarrassed your brother in front of friends, business partners, family. Do you think this helps anyone?" "Maybe it doesn't help you," I replied, voice steady. "But it helps me, and that's long overdue." Gasps stirred around us. For once, I didn't shrink. Mom reached for me, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, we never meant to hurt you. We just didn't realize how much you were giving." I pulled my hand back gently. "You realized. You just preferred not to see it. There's a difference." Ethan pushed forward, eyes glassy. Whether from alcohol or shame, I couldn't tell. "I messed up, okay? But you didn't have to humiliate me like this." I looked at him squarely. "Do you remember calling me from Germany at 3 a.m, begging for money you promised to repay?" I wired it without hesitation. That wasn't humiliation. That was love. I gestured to the invoice on the table, still catching copper light under the chandeliers. "This is truth. If truth humiliates you, maybe it's because it's overdue." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. Cousins whispering, colleagues exchanging uneasy looks. Savannah's voice cut through, softer but certain. "She's right. I tried to push her out because I felt threatened, and look what it caused." Dad glared at her. "Savannah, not now." But she didn't back down. "Yes, now, because I don't want to marry into a family that pretends respect is optional." Murmurs rose higher. The jazz trio started packing their instruments, unsure if the night was salvageable. Grandma Eleanor stood again, commanding the floor. "Jack, Linda, you raised 2 children. One you coddled into entitlement, the other you bled dry. And tonight, the one you dismissed has finally stood up. You ought to be ashamed." Dad's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. For once, he had no comeback. Mom's eyes brimmed, tears sliding down as she whispered, "She's right." The admission sliced the air. Ethan flinched as though struck. I let the silence breathe, then said quietly, "I'm not here to burn bridges, but I won't build them alone anymore. If you want me in your lives, you meet me on solid ground, with respect, with boundaries, with accountability. Otherwise, I walk away. And this time, I don't come back." The weight of my words pressed down on the room. No one rushed to fill the space. Finally, Ethan whispered, "I don't know if I can fix this." "You can't," I said softly. "Not in one night, Not with one apology. You fix it by changing, or you don't fix it at all. Savannah's shoulders sagged, but there was something almost relieved in her expression. Then maybe this is the only way forward. Mom reached for Dad's arm, her voice quivering. Jack, she's not wrong. He didn't answer. He just looked at me, eyes unreadable, as though for the first time he saw me not as the family's scaffolding, but as a person standing on her own. I picked up the envelope, slid it back into my bag, and straightened my shoulders. The decision had already been made in my heart. Whether they chose to change or not, I was done being invisible. As I turned toward the door, Grandma Eleanor caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. Approval, permission, pride. The night that began as another celebration for Ethan had ended with my declaration, and there was no turning back. 2 months passed after the showdown at the inn. Life in Aspen had settled into a rhythm I finally recognized as my own. Client meetings over cappuccinos, late nights sketching under copper lamplight, weekends on the slopes. Caldwell & Copper was no longer just a name on an invoice. It was a studio with momentum, with real clients and word of mouth spreading across Colorado. One chilly morning, I stopped at a newsstand and froze. A glossy business magazine sat on the rack, its cover splashed with bold letters, Colorado's Creative Rising Stars. And there, half a page inside, was my face. The article praised my clean, authentic design style and featured photos of the Summit Roasters branding plastered on billboards along I-25. I laughed aloud, startling the vendor. "That's me," I whispered, barely believing it. That same evening, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized all too well, Savannah's. I let it ring once, twice, then curiosity won. Her voice was tight, strained. "Marissa, I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't urgent. Ethan's startup is failing. Investors are pulling out. We need a rebrand fast, and everyone keeps mentioning your name. Could you help us?" The irony nearly stole my breath. My brother, the golden child who once couldn't even text me an invitation, was now circling back, hat in hand. "I thought you didn't like my vibe," I said coolly. Her silence cracked. "I was wrong. About everything. We're desperate." I let the pause stretch, savoring the shift. "If Caldwell & Copper takes you on as a client, you'll pay full rate. No family discount, no late payments, every revision logged, every hour billed." She swallowed audibly. "Of course. And one more thing," I added, my tone sharpening. "This is business. You don't get me the fixer anymore. You only get the designer." By the time I hung up, I felt an almost wicked satisfaction humming in my chest. Not spite, exactly, something cleaner. Justice. The following week, Ethan and Savannah walked into my Aspen office. It wasn't the cramped Boston apartment where I once designed on the edge of exhaustion. It was a bright, modern studio with copper accents gleaming against white walls, my logo embossed on the glass door. Ethan looked around, jaw tight. "You've built something," he muttered. "Yes," I said simply, sliding the contract across the table. "Now let's discuss terms." For once, they listened without interrupting, without assuming, without dismissing. Their signatures landed on the dotted line, my rates untouched. After they left, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the contract. My heart didn't ache anymore. I didn't crave their apology, their approval, their love in exchange for my labor. I had flipped the script. Later that month, their rebrand launched. My designs, polished, strategic, expensive, carried their company's name across Denver. The work was excellent, not because I wanted to save them, but because my standards demanded it. And every invoice cleared without delay. That was my sweet revenge. Not revenge at all, but proof. Proof that my worth was undeniable, that they now had to pay the price, literally, for what they once exploited. As I walked past a downtown billboard carrying my copper-toned design, I caught my reflection in the glass. Stronger, freer. This wasn't about payback anymore. It was about finally standing in the place I was meant to be. On my own terms. A month after sealing the deal with Ethan and Savannah, I found myself standing on a ridge just outside Aspen, the Rockies blazing under the late afternoon sun. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and melting snow. In my pocket, a new set of keys jingled, a sound that felt heavier than metal, richer than gold. They were the keys to a small but beautiful cabin I had just closed on. Not a gift, not an inheritance, not something borrowed or begged. Mine. Paid for with the success of Caldwell and Copper, with hours of labor that no one could dismiss or rewrite. Grandma Eleanor was the first person I called. When she picked up, her voice cracked with joy. "So, you're officially the lady of your own castle?" "Something like that," I laughed. "It's just a cabin, but it's mine." She paused, then said softly, "That's what matters. You finally hold the keys, literal and otherwise." Her words clung to me as I walked through the front door that evening. The cabin smelled of cedar and fresh paint. Sunlight spilled across polished wooden floors. For once, silence didn't mean loneliness. It meant peace. I unpacked slowly, almost reverently. Sketches rolled in tubes, a mug I bought at a flea market, the copper lamp I had carried from Boston to Colorado. Each item felt like proof of survival, of building, of arriving. Later that week, Mom called. Her voice was tentative, careful, like someone knocking at a closed door. "I saw the magazine feature," she began. "You looked happy. I just wanted to say we're proud of you, even if it took us too long to say it." I didn't rush to forgive. I didn't rush to answer. Finally, I said, "Thank you, but you need to know, I'm not the same daughter who used to fix everything. If you want me in your life, it has to be different." "I understand," she whispered. For once, I believed her. Ethan sent a brief text weeks later. "Thanks for the work. We couldn't have done it without you." I stared at it for a long moment, then tucked my phone away. Gratitude was a start, but it wasn't everything. What mattered now wasn't whether they changed, it was that I had. On the first night in my cabin, I lit a fire, curled into a blanket, and stared at the flames. Outside, snow fell softly, muffling the world. Inside, I held the keys in my palm, their edges pressing into my skin, reminding me that the door to my life would never again be locked by someone else. Looking back, I realized this journey was never just about a party I wasn't invited to, or money I never saw again, or even a family that didn't see me clearly. It was about me, about the girl who once measured her worth in sacrifice finally choosing to measure it in freedom. I learned that love without respect is just dependence, that boundaries aren't selfish, they're survival, and that success tastes the sweetest when it's built on your own terms, not borrowed approval. Yes, it hurt to stand up in front of the people who raised me and demand to be seen. Yes, it cost me comfort and certainty and the illusion of family harmony. But what I gained was something greater. My own voice, my own space, my own keys. To anyone listening who has ever felt invisible, taken for granted, or shut out, you don't have to wait for permission to take up space. You can build your own doors and carry your own keys. If this story touched you, please hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what's the one key you're holding on to for your own life?